There we go. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our meeting on parking and everything. This is an excellent presentation. I read it 2 nights in a row. It's really well done, well done. With that, I'd like to call this workshop to order. Christy, are we in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we are.
Hey, I need approval of the agenda. Mr. Bill's not going to be here today, so you ought to lead approval, Glenn. Glenn, second. Tammy, thank you very much. Glenn, Josh, could you introduce the people that we have here?
Absolutely, thank you, ma'am.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but we do have to have a roll call.
Okay, Mr. Grant, you here? He's there.
Here.
Mr. Hawkins is not here. Mr. Ames?
Here.
Ms. Beckett?
Here.
Mr. Lennox?
Here.
He's here. Mr. Lennox? Mr. Stanford?
Here.
And myself, we're all here. Hi, Josh.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everyone. By way of background, the town of Hilton Head Island issued a request for qualifications for experienced firms to perform a comprehensive beach parking analysis and assist in the development of a strategic action plan to better address the town's current and future beach parking needs. The town received several submissions from a variety of national firms and ultimately selected Walker Consultants to undertake this project. Walker Consultants is an industry leader in all aspects of parking consulting that encompass operations, technology, and mobility solutions. They have extensive experience advising coastal and barrier island communities on ways to bring effective and practical solutions to complex parking challenges. With that introduction, I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Mr. Jim Corbett, Director of Studies for Walker Consultants.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Let me get my screen shared here real quick. Let's get to the right one here. Almost. Okay, looks like I'm unable to get the presentation screen here. I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Perfect, okay. If I could get this to go to presentation mode, I think we'd be in great shape, but for whatever reason, let's try one more here. There we go. I think we're in good shape. Okay. Mr. Mayor, thank you for the excellent opening comments there. I don't know that we've ever had someone read one of our parking presentations twice in one evening, but that's a good sign, and we appreciate your patronage toward our effort here. And Josh, thank you for the introduction. Good morning, council members, town staff. As Josh said, my name is Jim Corbett. I am the Director of Planning Studies for Walker Consultants in the Southeast. With us today on this call are my colleagues, Joey Rolland, who's our principal in charge. Joey's a professional engineer out of our Charlotte office. We also have Jeff Pozlusny, our technology advisor. Jeff is a certified parking professional. That's what the CPP stands for there. And also Tom Zubka, our strategy advisor, is on the call. Tom, like myself, is a certified administrator of public parking and also a certified parking professional. So at various times, members of the team may have an opportunity to speak up here and answer your questions that you may have. So I want to take you back and all the way back to March. For those of us that remember, that was a rather interesting time at the onset of the COVID pandemic here. Almost to the date, we were authorized for this project at about the same time much of the shutdown occurred around the country. Normally, a study like this would take us about 90 to 120 days. I think after you get past that 4-month mark, you really tend to overanalyze things. But because of the delayed start here we really didn't get to have our initial kickoff meetings until the 1st of May. So it's about almost a 60-day, well, good 45-day delay there. And at that time, of course, we started with town department meetings there in May, as well as meeting and interviewing with the individual council members, as many that were available to meet with us with their schedule. And then shortly thereafter, we delivered our first milestone, which was the stakeholder intake, inventory, and market conditions in June. So at about June, things kind of picked up a little bit, and we were able to really get back on schedule there, delivering a milestone every 30 days or so, including the evaluation of financial current assets and programs. Milestone 3 was an evaluation of the Low Country Celebration Park and future needs. And then, of course, milestone 4 delivered in September was the actual parking master plan. And then, of course, here we are today with the town council workshop. I will bring your attention to the 2 yellow kind of icons there. Those were, if you will, kind of a kickoff meeting in June with the merchants and homeowners association groups, the leadership members of those associations. And then we actually had a follow-up meeting with them after we had completed the parking master plan to share the results of our efforts there. So that's the brief schedule that we've done year to date. Some of the study metrics, and you've probably had an opportunity to see much of this in our 4 deliverables here, but I wanted to give you kind of a brief overview here. Amount of on-street parking, we did take notice of the 43 spaces, the on-street spaces in the Coligny area there, Nassau, Lagoon, and North Forest Beach Drive. The total amount of off-street parking, a little over 1,500 spaces, including 7 beach access parks and 3 community parks. I say the community parks is many of these 3 locations literally are adjacent to some of the beach access areas that we were asked to take a look at with this evaluation. So a total of just under 1,600 parking spaces in the on and off-street designation. We wanted to recognize community partners in the Circle to Circle area. Obviously, the University of South Carolina Beaufort Hospitality Campus is already a partner. And we've initiated some discussions with the Holy Family Catholic Church, which happens to offer about 239 existing surface parking spaces in and around their campus there, as well as the St. Luke's Church, roughly a little over 112 surface parking spaces with their campus as well. We did want to once again make recognition of your gold level bike friendly community, 64 miles of public pathways, 50 miles of pathways, shared roadways within some of the private developments as well. So again, we said that all along. That's a tremendous asset that we feel is going to be a big piece of this parking master plan here. As I did mention, the public stakeholder meetings that we had with the leadership of Coligny area merchants and homeowners association, I should call that property owners association. We had that June 3rd and September 24th. Kind of the last 2 there, we did work with the town staff to create a public survey. That survey was online from July 6th to July 19th. We had approximately 863 responses to that survey, representing about 43 hours of public comment. So I think we were very fortunate in the fact that we couldn't host community open house meetings, that we had this public survey response opportunity here. It was a big piece towards soliciting input from the constituents of the Hilton Head Island. And then, as I mentioned, we had about 15 focus group meetings, town departments, council members. We did meet with the Sandbox Children's Museum and leadership of both the Circle Center Shopping and Coligny Plaza areas there. 3 of the key metrics we pulled from the online survey are represented here on this slide. The first one there on the left is 85% of the respondees said that the town should charge a fee to park at their public beach access locations. Obviously, 15% said no. This idea of reintroducing a civil parking citation to enforce the fee to park and enforce the no parking signs in and around the districts, not just the paid parking component. 71% said yes, in addition to the towing ordinance that already is in place. Obviously, 29% said no. And then the last piece there, the concept of should the town invest and build a parking structure in the Coligny area there or the capacity locations. 62% of the respondents said no, and 38% said yes. So we took a step back and we said, what is the study objective here? What is our purpose of this? And we were able to extract some language from the RFP here and develop what we would consider to be a mission and a vision statement for this objective here. And some of the key words there are well-maintained, safe, and convenient public parking and mobility access, not only for the town's residents, but for visitors to the Coligny area and beach access locations. And with that, from a vision perspective, we like the parking and mobility access will be provided using a unified and coordinated public parking policy to include a management system, parking fee structure, resident pass issuance, and collections and enforcement mechanisms which would be utilized to effectively maximize public parking availability and usage within the town. That's kind of a mouthful there, if you know, but obviously there's a lot of pieces that we feel are critical to making this program a success. So just a high-level summary of our recommendations within the deliverables that we provided there. We did come up with the idea to support a fee to park. That fee to park recommendation was based on research of other nearby jurisdictions, other nearby barrier island and coastal communities that are currently charging a fee to park. We'll talk about that a little bit later here. The idea and need to maintain a resident beach access pass. This supports the annual or biannual payment for residents to buy a pass to park at these beach access locations so that the residents do not have to pay an hourly fee to park when patronizing these locations. As I talked a little bit earlier, the Coligny area on-street spaces, when we looked at the entire Coligny area there, not only the beach access parking, but the low country celebration parking spaces, we couldn't help but not overlook the on-street spaces. There are about 40 spaces surrounding the area there on North Forest, on Lagoon, and Nassau that, again, are what are considered public parking spaces in the right-of-way areas there. To support the fee to park, one of the growing best practices that we're seeing is an implementation of the pay by cell phone programs that are rapidly expanding around the country. What's helping these programs gain traction right now is this idea that because we're in a pandemic, a COVID virus situation, folks are looking for touchless payment solutions. I can't tell you how many communities that have pay stations, single space meters that have been installed. And every time we're on these kind of best practice shared calls, we're hearing nothing but these municipal jurisdictions spending man hours and labor going around on a regular basis, wiping down these pay stations, basically to prevent the spread of the virus in that sense. So this idea of putting the payment transaction in the user's own hand, everybody, of course, has a mobile cell phone today. This idea of being able to pay by cell is a tremendous opportunity here. You already have this in place at your airport for your short and long-term parking there. We were asked to take a look at resident parking districts, and we came back with more of a policy recommendation. This idea of kind of an operational plan of how to develop residential parking districts. We think that it shouldn't necessarily be the town's decision to mandate where a residential parking district should be, but more so have the residents of the community request an opportunity to work with the town to develop the residential parking districts. Some of these situations may only be seasonal where the need for a residential parking district could fall into play. We understand it may not necessarily be a problem year-round. So moving on to the right-hand side of the page there, we like the idea as a best practice of seeing the license plate as a permit credential. Many communities are moving away from the, if you will, the window decals or the bumper decals and moving towards this license plate credential. Again, in the world that we live in today, you don't have to deal with the distribution of this permit credential where every vehicle already has a built-in permit. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. One of the challenges and if you will, things that we heard quite often was essentially the lack of consistent parking enforcement. We understand the town may be a little challenged with its resources in order to maintain consistent parking enforcement throughout the peak season, especially. So this idea of keeping a consistent parking enforcement will help the parking program survive in this sense. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Bringing back the municipal parking citation program, we think is a big component to this. The idea of being able to issue a civil citation would enable the parking enforcement officer to issue a citation for a no parking violation or a inability to pay fee or expired fee in a paid parking situation, and having the municipal court system maintain this citation program here, allowing for the adjudication to play out. The big piece of the two that I just spoke of is third-party management contract here. This is an idea of hiring a professional parking provider that we see in many communities around the country, coastal communities, barrier island communities, where you're bringing in under contract professionally trained individuals, not only to manage, but to operate, to enforce the components of the parking program as well, and to, as I said, to maintain it there. And the last piece there on the recommendation was a wayfinding and guidance piece that speaks to software platforms to communicate the availability of parking at various times of the day, times of year, and so on and so forth. So these were kind of our top 10 recommendations here, and we'll move into what we would consider some more immediate action items to move forward with this master parking plan here. So as I spoke a little bit about, in the first, let's call it 3 to 6 months, if the town were to move forward with this, we think the most important item here is to establish a parking enterprise fund. This, in a sense, creates a parking department whereby revenues and expenses are inclusive of that department. There would be no contribution from the general fund. The parking enterprise fund manages the parking system based on the user fees and revenues that are brought in, and that, of course, offsets any parking operating expenses from a labor perspective to a maintenance perspective, and even including some capital improvements as well, too. So creating its own standalone department, we feel, is a big piece here. Some of the housekeeping items, behind the scenes that the staff attorney and town would need to work through here are the next 3 items on the list here. Establishing the paid parking zones through the code of ordinances there. In this case, we want to make sure that the charter actually allows for these paid parking zones to exist. The parking fine resolution, again, as I spoke of earlier, brings back this idea of issuing a municipal citation, a civil citation, administrative citation. There was a lot of discussion in this of what should that fine amount be? And I think that a lot of people, with the $20 citation amount in place, I think a lot of what we heard is that folks were willing to take that citation hit as a cost of their experience to park and enjoy everything that Hilton Head Island has to offer on the beach in their beach access areas. So we're recommending a $50 citation penalty with increases that are similar in place to take that up to a maximum penalty of $70. The parking enforcement resolution, again, housekeeping item for the charter there. The town should draft an ordinance that allows the town manager to create administrative public parking policies and essentially establish the contract for parking management and enforcement of Title 12, Chapter 3 in the town charter there. And then lastly, the idea of adopting the resident parking district policy should be something that should be worked out as part of the initial 6 months of this program here. Let's see here. Some more of the short-term action items involved with this. These would be, that 6 to 12 month window, if you will, as far as moving forward with the program. A couple of RFPs we think need to be established. One is an RFP for mobile payment vendors from a technology standpoint. In our reports, interestingly enough, we talked a little bit about this idea of having multiple mobile payment vendors. And let me tell you a little bit about this. The idea is that many of your visitors to the island are coming from different parts of the country. On average, there's probably a good 4 to 5 mobile payment vendors that are out there that are established in various towns, communities, and cities. And what we're seeing as a best practice case is this idea of allowing all of those mobile payment vendors to work within a community. So as if I'm a visitor or a guest to the island there, I may have one of these mobile payment apps already on my phone. I don't necessarily have to download a new app for my phone. I can continue to use the current app on my phone to pay for my parking. And that's established that if I'm paying for a parking for Hilton Head Island zone, that money would certainly go to the town of Hilton Head Island as opposed to my hometown community where I came from. The other piece is an RFP for the parking management contract. There's probably a good half a dozen national and regional professional parking operators that are out there. Some are already operating in nearby communities in South Carolina. Obviously, there would be an advantage to partnering with one of those firms because there could be some shared resources that would help the town during the non-peak season as well as the peak season staffing and labor needs in order to make the program work. The third one is a pretty big piece here. All successful programs are dependent upon a successful communication program. And by this, I mean communicating that timeline, communicating the changes as the changes are being rolled out. I want to recognize the town already does a fantastic job through its regular update meetings using the YouTube venue, if you will. But this idea of having instructional videos and how-to videos and really bringing that up to speed would be a big piece. We see the merchant stakeholders being a big piece of this as well to help communicate the program through tabletop advertisement and things like that as people patronize the various restaurants and retail shops there. So we can't really say enough of that communications program, but we think that's going to be a huge piece to rolling out the new master plan program. And then lastly there is once you've got a parking management contract on board at about that 12-month period there, we think the key would be setting up a parking management contract with an online permit management system so that folks can have the opportunity to go online and purchase or register their license plate as a beach parking access credential. Now, we understand that not everybody has access to the internet or the ability to go online and complete a transaction like this. So we recognize the need to have some folks still be able to come into a parking office and be able to make that transaction in person. The idea here, of course, is it's not going to be, a very frequent process because if we're still honoring that beach access permit for every 2 years, the idea there's going to be certain peak periods where people are renewing. But on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, it should not be a very busy system. But as a best practice, this idea of allowing the constituents to put the transaction in their own hand, on their own time especially, not having to be subject to town hours, operating hours. We see many people conducting these transactions after hours. We all have day jobs. A lot of times we do a lot of our planning and internet work during the off hours and evening hours, or for that matter, weekend hours. So that's what we see as kind of the 6 to 12 month window here for this program. Then rolling into some midterm action items here. By midterm, we're talking about that 12 to 24 month window, and effectively this is going to be when your program is already up and running. The three key items here we see are the dynamic wayfinding solution on the left there. So this is a solution that's paired with the real-time mobile payment transactions and using a camera counting system. So bear with me here. As a patron comes into a lot, some of those patrons may be a beach access credential, which means they're not doing anything from a payment standpoint when they come into the lot to park. The others will be certainly using the mobile app to conduct their short-term visit or their payment transaction. So you effectively have two dynamics there. The real-time mobile app is going to provide a transfer of information from a counting standpoint, but those that are coming in with the beach access credential, you want to have what we call a subsequent camera system that would be able to track that activity. So marrying those two technologies together is going to be able to give you a real-time count system that can be shared with patrons coming on and off the island, as well as residents that are already on the island. So having that update status of knowing how full the locations might be, where the availability might be, we think that's a big piece of the success of this program. Again, talking earlier about the bike facility infrastructure there, we think the town already does a fantastic job with its pathway system. One of the things that we noticed when we were there at our site visits is that there is limited bike parking at the various beach access locations there. So we think, and we want to recommend this idea of expanding capacity at these beach access locations so you can begin to change that behavior of, hey, maybe I don't need to drive my car to the beach every time I'm on the island and go to visit the beach. If I'm already on the island, I have the option now of being able to ride my bike to the beach or to the community park, because I know when I get there, there's going to be substantial infrastructure for me to lock and store my bike once I'm at that location. So it's really more of a behavioral change that we think is going to help with a lot of that demand management. And the last piece in that 12 to 24 months is really working with the private partnerships that the town already has established. This idea of using some of the additional existing surface lot inventory to offset potentially some of the shortfalls during the peak demands, the peak seasonal demands, and partnering with some of those entities to be able to include parking opportunities in certain peak areas there. And so if the town's charging a fee to park at the beach access locations, we think that some of the private partnerships might be interested in coming on board with this approach, because if they can be in it for a revenue opportunity that may help offset some of their capital needs within their venue or their destination, it all of a sudden becomes very attractive for others to want to partner and participate with the town. So the long-term items here that we're talking about, and we had this slide on there at the previous presentation there. This is probably a pretty extreme example of what bike parking infrastructure could look like. You see more of these types of situations on college campuses where bike use of bike for transportation is a more predominant feature. But I think the neat thing about this is that it really is more of a sustainable design that we see that provides a covered area. Again, it's a pretty massive structure here, but this idea that someone has a clean and safe and usable location where they could store their bike at any one of the locations. So back to the long-term items here, the action items. We talked a little bit about that public-private partnership. One of the things that we see as an outfall of the paid parking program is an opportunity to expand enforcement, not just of the town's assets, but to expand enforcement to some of the nearby or adjacent private sectors there. As an example, right now, we understand that Caligny Plaza is already paying a security contractor to be on site during the peak days, times of years, to regulate that short-term parking turnover. Speaking with not only the leadership group there, but we had an opportunity to talk to some of the actual security officers that work that location there. It's a full-time challenge. And this is even prior to a paid parking solution. So we know that when peak times are prevalent, there's going to be a need to manage those short-term parking needs, especially as the Low Country Celebration Park comes online, bringing a greater concentration and a greater demand to that Coligny area there. So we think there's some opportunities there, particularly as an outfall of some of the paid parking proceeds, if you will, we'll talk a little bit about later. Wayfinding infrastructure, upgrading what we currently see along Highway 278. You've got some very good static wayfinding signs there that are simply telling motorists where these beach access and park locations are. But this idea of being able to communicate that digital information, the count, the availability information that I spoke to earlier, to a sign that can be developed and built and instructed in the rights of way along 278. Clearly a partnership with DOT to approve this and to move forward with this suggestion there. But we think that's going to be a big piece of being able to communicate that information to motorists as they're moving about the island. And then lastly there, the parking inventory evaluation. As part of this survey, we did hear some respondents say a parking structure would solve everything in the Coligny area there. We think it's important to continue to monitor that seasonal parking demand, to be able to now, once you have quantified data, to be able to use that data to determine the magnitude of the parking volume on the island with that mobile payment transaction data, and being able to systematically record the number of beach access permits that are used within certain locations. So now you're going to have that power of that tool to make those decisions and to be able to base some facts on whether or not the need to build additional infrastructure for parking is a key consideration. I wanted to touch a little bit about the financial model that we put together here. The one that is actually in the deliverable there speaks to a paid parking hourly rate of $4 an hour during the peak season in the South Island locations. These would be obviously the Coligny area, the Alder Lane Beach Access area, the Low Country Celebration Park area there. During those, what we would call probably May through September, it includes those peak months as well as some shoulder months on either side there. This idea of then stepping that fee back to $2 an hour during the non-peak season would still be able to enable the town to maintain a paid parking system. Creating some transportation demand initiatives. As you move north on the island there, the Central Island locations, we recommend stepping those fees back to $3 an hour during the peak months of May through September, and then the non-peak months cutting that in half to $1.50 an hour. And then the locations at the very northern point of the island there, $2 an hour May through September, $1 an hour through the non-peak months. As you can see at the bottom of the slide there, I think that the goal from this was just to establish an order of magnitude based on the rates that we were recommending here. Your operating costs, including all of your contract labor, maintenance needs, collection needs, are roughly going to come into about $1 million a year. And when you can see those revenues approaching the 4 million mark, the bulk of that revenue from the initial year, of course, is going to come from those peak summer months there, giving you a rather significant net operating income of just shy of about $3 million in revenue. So we always get asked the question of what if? And so by what if, I interpret that to mean, okay, maybe $4 and $2 an hour for the South Island may be a little rich for some. So this idea of stepping it back to $2 an hour, $1.50 an hour, and $1 an hour during those peak months, and then reducing the non-peak months as well, basically cuts that revenue opportunity in half there. It does scale back a little bit on the operating expenses there. And then, of course, the net operating income in this case comes to about $1 million a year. What we've seen in some of the other barrier island communities in South Carolina is that they are implementing a seasonal pay-to-park rate, and then the non-peak months, they're not charging a paid parking rate there. So what this does, it keeps that May through September in the South, Central, and the North Island locations as a fee to park. But as you can see there, anytime you're massaging the rates, if you will, it's going to affect your outcome. And so by not charging during the non-peak months, you're still going to have a fairly healthy income there of just shy of $900,000. This assumes that there would be no enforcement during those non-peak months there. And so that's something that we can help the town come to an appropriate contract establishment there as to, is there really a need to have enforcement all year round, or should that enforcement just be particular to the peak operating months there? So I threw the second two models in there just for a point of discussion there, and ultimately for order of magnitude, so folks can have an understanding of what those implications are based on rates and times of year. I wanted to show this slide. I talked a little bit about this idea of going towards more of a dynamic messaging system in the rights of way to help communicate as folks are coming on and off the island there. We've seen some systems where they're actually showing space count availability. The challenge was showing numbers. In other words, if you had 38 spaces open at Folly Beach and 14 spaces at Dreesen Beach and 50 spaces at Coligny, sometimes that's hard to manage from an actual count. So we like the idea of creating more of an open or full message as people are approaching. And this can start as early as the roadways coming onto the island there. It doesn't necessarily have to be in portions of 278, but this idea of being able to communicate this visual message to motorists, we certainly think will go a long way towards managing that traffic demand and circulation. A little bit about the parking structure evaluation design work that we did here. This was a little bit of a busy slide, I realize, but the design work that Joey and our engineers were able to come up with was creating 3 different looks showing 3 different parking structures on the existing Coligny Beach surface parking lot there. And as you can see, the big numbers in the middle of the page there, adding a 465 space deck, a 3-level deck we're talking about here, and all 3 of these examples here, gives you a net gain anywhere from 264 spaces up to 320 spaces. Now the difference, of course, here is in the second example, we talk about adding some street side retail commercial space in front of the deck on the Coligny Avenue circle to circle there. So it creates that walkability opportunity for folks to be able to walk down the street and not just walk by a giant parking structure that has no activation, if you will, other than simply parking. The third example shows that same commercial space on the ground level with some housing elements on top of that. Potentially could be affordable housing opportunities there. But the idea that now you're creating a shell, if you will, that's going to still offer increased parking opportunity, but you won't have that look and feel of the parking structure from the street side level there. We did have some additional discussion with town staff related to aesthetics and design. So you can see some of the cost per space in there. That does include some of the more architecturally pleasing design, if you will. So we're not just looking at a utilitarian style parking structure where you've got nothing but concrete, if you will. So this gives it more of a stylistic approach and look. And you can see some of those costs there, almost 24,000 a space, and 24,000 and 24,000 there. Typically more of a utilitarian look might be in the realm of $12,000 to $15,000 a space. So we really wanted to point that out, that your cost per space does tend to go up quite a bit when you're talking about architectural design enhancements there. So that's essentially it from a point of sharing the information of kind of a high level, if you will. I suspect at this point we would want to turn it over for open discussion from the town and council members.
Mr. Ames.
Mr. Mayor, you're leading off with me.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's a lot to absorb. I like the idea of the parking enterprise fund because I think that goes in the direction of accountability. I think communication is absolutely essential for a variety of reasons. I do wonder about the fee structure that you've provided. I don't want to get it too far into the weeds, but I think that the fee structure relates to a broader topic, and let me discuss that. The bottom line for our community is what beach experience do we want to provide? That is a community value that requires the community to speak to that issue. Beach experience connects to something like an access cap. How many people do we want on the beach at any one time? And that's a capacity issue. Right now, I think there are I think you said 1,600 parking spaces. And we already have something closing in on 3,700 resident parking passes. That suggests that down the road we're going to have an issue. But really what this points to is that we need a comprehensive beach management plan that touches more issues than just solving the parking problem. The beach is going to become, already is to some degree, the destination of an ever-increasing off-island and even out-of-state population. I don't think the town can stop that. That's going to happen. So it can only influence that through its policies and laws, how convenient the access is and what the cost is for that access. I think this has the potential of being a political nightmare for us. And so I think the town not only needs to be communicating its principles and goals to the community, but also to the regional governments. I just believe that unless we open up conversations early with regional governments, we're going to have a real problem down the line. I think our community needs to decide what are the goals and principles that will guide our decisions. Is there a reasonable cap on beach density? And what are the best ways to manage numbers of beachgoers? It's a much broader issue than just parking fees and management. It has to do with how are we going to protect resident interest and manage off-island pressure. The questions here aren't answered in this report, so I'm thinking that in our retreat, we ought to be talking about a beach management plan that combines much that is already being done, but restructures it in a combination within that enterprise or beach management fund. It includes the parking resident, guest, day tripper, safety, security, response needs, refuse, the environment / turtles and so on, renourishment, and then studying the capacity issues over time. I think these things need to be combined in a more comprehensive way to protect the interest of our residents and the experience of beachgoers generally. I think this is a brand issue that will benefit tourism values, but also, most importantly, protect the experience for residents who live on the island. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Lennox?
Jim, outstanding work. Please pass on to Joey, Jeff, and Tom how pleased I am with the work and the recommendations, both short, mid, and long term. And I think early in your comments, you talk about communication. I think that is enormously important to anything that we do. And I think born out of David's comments about a broader beach policy, the communication of that issue is extremely important. I have two questions. On the parking structure, the majority of people that you spoke with objected to that. Did they give you any indication whether their objection was born in capacity or was it born in the cost of the structure?
Lennox, I would say that it dealt with capacity in most cases. This idea of building more inventory invites more off-island users to an already congested, potentially congested area.
Is that typical?
You know, sometimes it can be, but I also hear the same story on the other side of the merchants saying our retail or our revenues are flatlined, and if we can't get more users to a commercial area from a small business or a business objective, we're never going to increase our revenue. So we tend to hear it both ways.
I like the idea. I like the concept of wrapping it with retail and residential to the extent that we would even consider pursuing something like that. It would take an awful lot of communication with the community. Jim, the second question has to do with the third-party management and the creation of the Parking Enterprise Fund. What's the relationship between the two? Because when I go down the Parking Enterprise Fund path, it seems like that supports the creation of a parking department and staff. And if so, do they manage the enforcement internally, or do they work in tandem with a third-party management company?
So the idea behind the Parking Enterprise Fund is that it would not necessarily incur additional town staff resources in that sense. The Enterprise Fund has to, from an organization chart standpoint, it does have to report to, let's call it a department monitor or a contract monitor in that sense. But the Enterprise Fund, the labor resources from that would completely come from the third-party management contract. So we do see that from time to time where there may be a department director, or maybe the Enterprise Fund reports to the assistant town manager or some capacity, and everything is the entire labor of that Enterprise Fund is outsourced. But really the idea behind it is to keep all the revenues generated from that system to be in a position to offset all of those operating and capital expenses there, not relying on any other contributions from the general fund or any of the other tax incentive funds.
And Jim, do you have examples of local governments using third-party management and examples of local governments that have established the Parking Enterprise Fund?
We do. We can certainly provide that information for you. There are, what we do see oftentimes is that, parking departments or parking divisions will generally roll up to a public works department, just because obviously they're doing a lot of the shared synergies, if you will. But we can provide that list and give you a more thorough look of towns and cities that have outsourced to these third-party contract agencies.
And final question, Jim. Are there examples of companies that would come in and consider negotiating our parking concession with us? For example, building that parking debt?
There are. We've seen that, and we've worked on a lot of the, if you will, kind of the P3 initiatives, if you will. while there are advantages to that, sometimes I caution that because obviously it really takes the control out of the town's hands, giving it to that third party entity, whether that be a financial entity that usually partners with an operator. Situations where that's already occurred has not necessarily produced the best relationship for the long haul, only because there's a lot of covenants involved in that where thresholds are established and commitments are established, and as things change, obviously we're in a pandemic, volumes have decreased to some extent. That can have an effect on the relationship of both parties in that type of an arrangement.
Thank you, Jim. John, those are my questions and comments.
Thank you. Tammy?
So, good morning. Thank you so much for all of that information. It was particularly helpful to put the report in context. David mentioned the beach experience. And so I see wrapped in this some positive attributes and some that cause me some concerns. And so I'm going to focus, since many people already have focused on the practical matters, and those will all get discussed as we're moving forward. But I just want to make sure that keeping a strong focus on that beach experience on the residents of the island, and that the concept as it draws closer to some sort of implementation being not that we don't lose our brand and who we are, and that this process really focuses on enhancing the beach experience for the residents, that we don't lose ourselves in trying to create an organization that makes it easier for our day trippers and visitors to the island to find parking and access the beach. We appreciate those who come, but we don't want to lose ourselves in all of that. And by way of some of the examples that concern me is the idea of the wayfinding signage. It just doesn't seem to me that something that would be bold like that, that would be rotating, that would be illuminated, or in keeping with who we are as a brand and what our residents on Hilton Head Island expect when they drive down our roads. So that's a concerning piece. The idea of creating additional capacity, while I understand that there may be some benefits with additional retail and even possibly some housing, I also am concerned that the experience that people expect who live here and those who come to Hilton Head because of who Hilton Head has become over the years and who we are, we don't expect to drive down and see a 3-story building with glass and lights and that sort of commerce. Caligni's charm is that it is a typical seaside beach, a getaway, a place where you really feel and experience a day at the ocean. So I have a lot of items that I've jotted down, but I want to strongly focus on, as we move forward with this, that we keep the focus on our residents and our brand and maintaining what we've come to know and expect as an island. So rather than go into my list of pros and cons, and I think that answers will come in time, but as long as we keep the focus where it belongs, we'll have a secure outcome. And I absolutely agree. I always agree on this. The more communication, the more information, the more dialogue we have, the better that outcome ultimately will be. So I look forward to continuing this conversation. I thank you for the wealth of information you've provided us. And I'm going to turn this over to someone else.
Mr. Grant.
I had a couple. I would like to say one, I think you did an excellent job in this parking initiative. You know, at first I was not excited. I was in between, but I think, you know, during the workshop, this would be a great opportunity to have more conversation with the council members. But I enjoyed what Tom Lennox said and David Ames said. There has to be a medium in between that. You know, there is a challenge in the Coligny area, and I think this needs to be moved forward and initiated. And the reason why I say that is because of what's about to be open in the spring with the Centennial Park. You know, my question is regarding the parking. Based on what you have here, my question is regarding to how, in terms of the monies that's being collected, and based on what you're saying, that we more than likely would have to hire a company to do all these things. My other question is about municipalities in terms of the citations. We would have to depend on the county municipal court, obviously, to collect those funds. And if they are not able to collect it, for instance, somebody who gets a ticket at a parking beach and they live in Boston, is that our responsibility, or will that be a third-party company that would get the money? Is my question. How do you deal with those issues?
So, good question, Mr. Grant. I appreciate the thought. So it's already happening, I believe, in Beaufort. I believe there is third-party management there where they're actually issuing municipal citations. They actually have a third-party contract collecting those revenues. They have an adjudicator that comes in and, you know, makes the decision of should the citation stand or should it be waived or voided. So they have that process established there. And with the parking citation software and the third-party citation software firms, all of that tracking, if you will, can track to people who live in different states. There is a process through, if you will, an arrangement with the Department of Motor Vehicles that information can be shared through those various interagencies. So it can be done. I think the critical piece of that, to Mr. Grant, is, you know, exploring that through the third-party vendor that the town would consider to manage its system. There's a number of different systems out there that handle it differently, but by the end of the day, the firm that you would be outsourcing this to handle your operations and enforcement would be collecting that on your behalf.
Okay. And my other statement is too, you know, I think we will be able to use whatever surplus to enhance the beach. For instance, lifeguards are right now, and some other people are collecting a whole lot of garbage on these beaches. And maybe that extra money could be used to basically help the lifeguard system, whoever, take care of the beaches better, beach nourishment, and build new buildings. For instance, on yesterday, we are planning our public safety committee meeting, talked about a kiosk for handicap. That might be some extra money that we could use money to enhance the beaches. Because right now, I'll be honest with you, I think that some of our beaches are not up to the same par as Coligny and Islanders. And I think, for instance, if we could enhance all of our beaches to make them all attractive, that would take some of the leeway off of Coligny so people have alternative places to go to the beach. Because that's my personal opinion. I just think that, you know, it is one of our major assets. I think we could do a better job enhancing and at the same time keep our brand fresh. One of the things that, you know, you see now, you see a lot more businesses trying to enhance their brand, trying to rejuvenate their business and investment. And as they do that, the town needs to continue to invest in terms of managing and improving the beaches. For instance, I believe Burke's Beach should have some type of easier path to get out there instead of going through the hard sand. Maybe we could put some mats out there, you know, and I think there should be some enhancement in terms of how we have access. So I support this. I think if we start with the 6 months and have a good conversation at the workshop, we should be able to move forward with something to address the parking issues prior to the new season starting. At least have something moving forward so that, you know, the different businesses such as I believe the Piggly Wiggly, where people are parking there, not going to the supermarket but going to the beach and just trying to find these hideaways. instead of parking on private property, maybe we can go ahead and move things forward so that we have a organized system to address this parking issue instead of just wait and see type of attitude. But yeah, I just want to congratulate you doing a good job on this and giving us real-time data in terms of what we need to do and if we wanted to increase it. And it's not about the money, but it's about how we use the money to enhance Hilton Head and to keep our brand going. So I think, this might, at the same time, my personal opinion, it helps the local people not feel like it's all on us to keep maintaining it, that maybe we can outsource some of this stuff so that we'll be able to keep our beaches looking nice throughout the year. But thank you.
Mr. Stanford.
Thank you. I am very impressed with this study and frankly pleased and surprised to see that fees in the range of $4 to $2 over the year can generate this kind of revenue. I think it's fantastic. It is a great opportunity for us moving forward. I agree with my colleagues about the necessity to create a beach policy and to do some of the studies necessary to implement that policy. That being said, I want to get into the nuts and bolts a little bit so that I'm sure that I and maybe some others understand it further. A simple question is this. There are people here who don't have smartphones. I have senior citizen friends who have the old-fashioned flip phone. How do they pay their fees?
Mr. Stanford, good question. They would have the opportunity to dial a 1-800 number to complete that transaction. The mobile payment providers understand that's a reality. That, I think we're seeing at about a low 90% of folks that have smartphones or mobile phones. But it is that extra 7% of the community that, can certainly create enough to create a disturbance. But there is an opportunity to dial a 1-800 number and speak with a live person.
Okay, I think that answers the question. I agree. Right now in today's environment, most people do have the smartphones. I don't understand tying together pay by cell and the license tag. Do you register your vehicle and your tag and tie with that a credit card number and a cell phone? Talk to me about the nuts and bolts of that.
That's exactly what the case is. When you established a mobile payment account through one of these providers, you do have a credit card on file, you do have your license plate number on file, and in fact, you can have several license plate numbers on file. If you're driving a spouse's car or a sibling's car, you can interchangeably assign that license plate to that transaction. You can actually have multiple credit card numbers on file as well too. So it's becoming quite flexible with these vendors. They realize that they have to be flexible in order to survive in today's culture.
Excellent, thank you. I'm also a little confused about wayfinding. I guess wayfinding isn't the right term. I'm thinking about identifying a vehicle when it arrives in the lot. In South Carolina, tags are on the rear of the car. And so tell me about the experience. I drive down to Coligny and I want to park. How will my car be identified?
The camera technology is really based on some of the LiDAR solutions that are out there today. It's not dependent upon capturing your license plate, Mr. Stanford. It's physically dependent upon capturing a vehicle coming in, crossing a threshold into a parking lot. At the same time as the vehicle leaves that parking, it's decrementing that count from the system. So the technology has come quite a long ways these days. As you can imagine, there's a lot of firms out there that are pushing this concept of autonomous vehicles and how the vehicles talk to each other. And again, it's interesting to see the reactions when I throw out that autonomous vehicle because our recommendation is that we're still 20 years away from mainstream adoption for that type of technology. So nonetheless, it's the camera systems have come a long way in being able to capture and identify a vehicle shape versus a pedestrian shape versus a bicycle shape, and being programmed to specifically count that vehicle as crossing over a threshold and crossing back over that same threshold when the vehicle leaves.
I guess I understand that. We'll follow up with more of that as it moves forward. But following through with my trip to Coligny, I arrive and the system identifies the shape of my car as a car. And I go in and I park and I stay there for 2 hours and I want to extend for additional hour. Do I have to do anything further to tell the system I want to stay for that extra hour?
Well, if you're paying by mobile application, yes, you would have to. But if you are a beach access permit holder, you would not have to do anything else with the system. It's just simply recognizing any vehicle or vehicles moving back and forth upon that entry-exit threshold there. And so the idea of marrying those two technologies together will provide an accurate count for a particular location.
Okay, so if I say, well, I want to stick around for a few more hours and I stretch it out to 5 hours on the beach, does anything happen to the vehicle that is then illegally parked?
Well, again, if you're paying by mobile application, yes, there would be, the operator would be enforcing those mobile payment transactions that have expired, and they would be then issuing that municipal citation, that civil citation to that vehicle for an expired paid session, if you will. So we're generally not big proponents of towing vehicles in paid parking environments. We like the idea of towing vehicles if it's a health and safety issue, to where someone's parked in such a manner that compromises other humans or bicyclists or other folks, other conditions that are put in place.
So a violation, whether it is in a town lot or even on a street surrounding Coligny, would not have meter maids or the type out there looking for violators.
Well, again, that's how you, dependent upon how you set the program up, there are systems that will communicate expired parking sessions to that parking enforcement personnel, so that they, on their handheld mobile device, they know that there is an opportunity to go issue a citation in a certain area because that credential has expired. We don't necessarily recommend that. Obviously that's something that when constituents learn about that, they're going to have a hard issue with that. That's that targeting enforcement component, which can certainly, create a lot of rub with the community. However, if a congestion situation becomes so bad that we have more people that are non-compliant versus compliant, then the opportunity to have that, if you will, targeted enforcement would be an opportunity to roll that out. So it really, there's a lot of policy decisions that come into this of, how strict does the town really want to be in its enforcement procedures? And typically that's a factor of how compliant the community is with the paid parking policies and the regulation signs that are existing.
Thank you. Then explain, please, the interval occupancy program. As I understand it, if I own a rental house here on the island and I rent it to you and your family for a week, this system will afford some form of beach permit, if you will. Explain how that works.
Certainly. So I think when we did the interval occupancy deliverable, we were talking about if there is a paid parking district that's established and your house falls in that district, you would have a credential to park in that district if it was a preferential parking district or residential parking district. If you're not present at your house and the interval resident comes in, they would have that opportunity to have that same privilege, that same parking credential as you would. The idea of giving, we talked about this extensively, not only internally with our team, but with the town staff as well. And we started out with this idea of allowing an interval resident to have that same beach access parking credential as you do. But then we said, well, this idea of, now that's too many, it certainly becomes a wealthy number of permits that are out there. And granted, that interval permit might only be 2 weeks or 1 week or 10 days, but we came back to the resolution of that interval resident would have to patronize the beach access locations and pay that hourly fee, just as an off-island visitor would have to pay. Now, clearly that's up for discussion. I think as consultants, we're actually required and asked to take a stand on a certain situation based on best practices that we've seen out there. So I think that can certainly be up for further discussion, but I think it all depends on if there are resident parking districts that are formalized and established. I think that becomes the starting point. If I'm an off-island visitor as an interval visitor, I should be held to that same standard of paying that hourly fee to park at a beach access location.
Okay, then overlaying that information with timeshares. We have many, many, many weeks and availabilities of timeshares here. I think what I'm hearing you say is that someone that is using a timeshare would pay the hourly rate. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's our initial recommendation, yes.
Okay. Now, I am a retired lawyer, so I want to make sure I understand in terms of penalties, in your mind, the difference between a civil penalty and a criminal penalty. To me, in the case of a criminal penalty, after assessment of a fine, assuming there is a continuing violation or failure to pay the fine, someone would be subject to being arrested and jailed for a period of time, whereas a civil penalty just ends with dollars and cents. Is that correct?
Well, and the civil penalty is tied to vehicle registrations. When you register your vehicle, if you have a number of outstanding parking citations in that sense, that information could be tied with DMV records and license plate, since the citation is actually issued to a license plate that assumes the owner of that license plate would be responsible for reconciling that civil citation. So the citation effectively stays with the vehicle tag or the vehicle license plate. And you can set up policies where if you have so many outstanding citations, that becomes more of a vehicle hold or a tag hold. So when I go to renew my license plate, I have to settle those outstanding citations. And again, that's all charter, that's policy, that would be how that would be set up. But civil would not certainly require somebody being subject to jail time or arrest in that sense.
Well, that's a relief. And I think the idea that it can be tied to tag registration is creative and effective. I have some legal issues we can talk about offline about that. Can you give us references to communities, particularly coastal communities, best of all in the Southeast, who have systems that are similar to the system you are recommending for us?
Well, I know when we did our research, we looked at certain areas, and I'm looking at one of the pages in the deliverable number 2 here. Folly Beach, Isle of Palms, I believe, was a recent community that's enacted a paid parking system to where they have a $10 daily maximum rate as well as a $15 weekend maximum rate. And then again, if you look at places like Myrtle Beach, really does more the hourly parking incremental rates. I think we also have Surfside Beach in here and Kiwa Island
Yes.
in its areas.
I think what I'm asking is not so much about the hourly fees, but rather the system for parking, using wayfinding, using tags, all of the rest of the pieces that you recommended to us. I'm interested in the mechanics of that and other communities' experience.
Yeah, and I will tell Mr. Stanford, there are communities that are using components of what we've described. I don't know that everybody's using the entire collective list. In addition to the question that was asked earlier about the enterprise funds, we can certainly provide you that list of communities that are incorporating those strategies. I don't have them in front of me today.
Oh, I understand. That's fine. If you can just pass that on through staff, it'll get out to us. One of the elephants in the room, as I see it, is that you are recommending opening Islanders Beach Park to non-residents. That is a valuable resource to many residents, and I see a political uprising about opening that up to non-residents. We just recently closed it to non-residents, and citizens are pleased with that. So if we retained Islanders Beach Park as residents only, it doesn't appear to me that would create a major impact on the system. Obviously, it would create a loss of revenue, but I wouldn't think it would be that much. I would like to see, I don't expect you have that right now in front of you, but I would like to see an evaluation of retaining Islanders Beach Park for residents only.
I think that's a fair question. I think one of the things that was pointed out to us is that there was, I think there is some sort of a grant or stipulation that was issued at one point where public parking had to be provided as a component of the Islanders Beach. The town has created limited metered spaces out there, which I know as the pandemic played out here, those spaces were taken offline for public access. And as you said, that location became a permit-only location for residents. I think we would need to probably vet through that grant issue as to why that needs to be, or does it have to be that specific location, or can that opportunity be offered somewhere else? But I agree with you, Mr. Stanford. I think a lot of the comments we heard from the residents were maintain Islanders Beach for the Islanders. I mean, that was almost every respondent said something to that capacity. So I think we'd have to spend a little more effort on that one.
Yeah, and the impact on your revenue projections is what I'm getting at there, and the feasibility of doing that. And then finally, is it going to be possible for us to have in place any components of this system for the 2021 high season?
I think it can be done. I mean, obviously, if we're looking at Memorial Day as kind of kickoff to that high season, we'd have to come to some pretty quick policy decisions as to, having a mobile payment platform in place and essentially having a contract operator in place to be able to manage that on behalf of the town. It's a big change when you go to that system, and I would recommend having a firm in place that has experience with that type of management of that type of program. So it would be a fast track, without a doubt.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not likely. I did skip over one question that I have, and that is, it seems to me education as to the aspects of the system are a vital part of the startup. I think we can educate residents pretty easily, but the non-residents, the day trippers as we refer to them, it seems to me could be a major problem and a headache in the beginning. Do you have ideas about the best ways to make this known to the broad general public, if you will?
I do, and that speaks to a lot of the rollout program initiatives. We've recommended grace periods where you're doing more of a boots on the ground educational program. I mean, you can do as much as possible through media advertisements and educational, but that assumes your user base is going to have access and seek out that advertisement. But this idea of, let's just say the perfect opportunity hit and the paid parking system was implemented by Memorial Day. The operator was in place. The operator was coming across situations where people weren't paying for parking because they may not have been aware or don't understand it. Creating that kind of ambassadorial feel to where the operator would have additional employees on site to not only help people with the system, but then for those that somehow just don't get it and they end up getting a citation inappropriately, we've seen warning packages given out to where you're now giving a warning citation in an instructional jacket to where that item fits in there. And now it becomes that take-home literature for that person so that the next time they come, they'll understand the program. They'll now have the resource to research information about the system before they come back to Hilton Head Island. So there's ways to kind of soften that effect. Now, again, that may very well, the town, I think, would have to decide, do we want to have a grace period for the entire first peak season? And by grace period, maybe you only allow one incident for someone where that second time, if they come and they fail to comply with the program, the citation's actually issued. We find that usually works in that case. But I couldn't, I think you're spot on when you're talking about ways to implement and educate this for folks that may not have that opportunity to be educated before they arrive at Hilton Head Island.
We have had varying experiences with consultant, and I want to say that I am very impressed with you and your firm. I appreciate your professionalism, a creative system here that not only can take burdens off of the town staff, also can become a profit center, is an exciting opportunity for us. Thank you for your expertise and time.
Josh?
I'm done, John.
Thank you.
Just wanted to provide one quick clarification since this is being broadcast publicly. The report and recommendations do not call for Islanders Beach Park being opened up to non-residents in its entirety. It is speaking specifically to 25 metered spaces that are currently located within Islanders Beach Park. And it's those metered spaces that are currently open to the public via a contractual obligation on a previous grant that the town received. So I just wanted to make that clear. The report is not suggesting that the beach pass system for island residents would go away at Islanders. It would just go back to the system that has been in place prior to the start of the pandemic.
Thank you for that clarification, and as people call and contact me, I will try to clarify it. Thank you.
Steve,
Mayor?
comments?
Mayor?
David?
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments, and I want to piggyback on what Glenn said, Jim. You answered directly and clearly all of our questions, and I really appreciate that kind of knowledge and direct speak, so to speak. Two comments, though. I spoke about beach experience, and I think we have to recognize that the beach experience may be different at different beaches. The density of users at Coligny might be very different than at Dreesen or the Islanders, and therefore I wonder whether or not the fee structure should begin to guide users and behavior and preferences through either higher fees or lower fees. I think that the density at Coligny is good up to a point, but we have Sea Pine Circle and congestion, and so maybe there is an ultimate limit to that, and the fees should recognize that. Chaplin might be a different story. Berks might be a different story. Pick Islanders Beach, and for a moment, imagine that it is open to the public. Maybe that's $10 an hour. You know, if somebody wants an experience on the beach at Hilton Head where it's not terribly congested, then maybe they'd be willing to pay more. So I'm just offering the possibility that we have to look at a broader range of fees than we're provided. Secondly, I think it's important for council to give the residents of the island confidence that they're not going to be asked to subsidize guest or off-island impacts. And I just think that's something we all have to state fairly clearly. And I think your beach enterprise fund or parking fund gives us some confidence that we'll be able to do that. Thank you.
Now, Bill.
We used to live down the Jersey Shore, and I can tell you that the way to keep people not in your town away from the beaches is to charge a substantial fee for parking. If you went to the beach, you were paying $35, $40 a day on Saturday and Sunday. You'd be surprised how that message gets out. You should find another beach at less money. I mean, the only way when you have a limited commodity that we have is to charge severely for that commodity. And we'll get less day trippers coming in here.
But John, that's why it's so important for us to be talking to the regional governments to explain what our challenges are so that we're not crucified for making statements that are misinterpreted by the populations of off-islanders and out-of-state people. I think communication early on is going to be critical.
I agree with the communication, David, but people that are selling developments out in Bluffton and Hardyville are saying in their brochures that they have a beach. They can say in their brochure, the footnote should say it costs $25 to park on Saturday and Sunday. And what's way is the education besides for talking to the people, the other governments? This has to be a monetary hit if people don't want to come here, because they're not spending any money while they're here. So, yes, Tammy. Tammy.
Thank you. Yes, I know, John, you and I have had that conversation before. We raised our children in New Jersey, and as raising children who are surfers and beach lovers at the beach often. And I can tell you that driving up to some of the nicer beaches and dropping the kids off so they could buy the tickets to get on the beach, not that we do that here and not that I would ever suggest that, but that's what you do there. And then having to find a parking lot and handing over a $50 bill, which covers you for the day. And that's just part of the decision you make when you are a day tripper to the beaches, as we frequently were up there. One of the questions I had to go back to Jim with was exactly on that topic. What is the experience that you can tell us about with regard to an hourly rate versus just a prepaid daily rate? And if you move your car and you go somewhere, you're coming back and you're paying that fee again. As an experience that we've had, it is what it is, and it's something that people should understand when they move their car. I was listening to a number of the potential difficulties with people saying, oh, we're going to be at the beach for 2-3 hours, prepaying, and then getting on the beach and forgetting that they've been there now for 3, 4, 5 hours, which can happen. Isn't it more, wouldn't it be easier to just do as we have up north in the past, to just pay a fee? You come in, you pay it. If you leave, you move your car and you plan on coming back, you pay it again. It's just the cost of the day at the beach. So that was one question that I had while everyone was talking. And I guess that goes to the compliance issue, and I think he may have touched on it, that grace period, that information period. And then how would you, I think you went back around and we talked about the idea that after a second time, there would be some consequences, which sounded to me like some sort of tracking would be in place to know who got their information take-home packet to read over, to know what to do in the future. And then the third thing that I would like to throw out, if this were implemented in any one of the 3 ways that were described in the revenue and the expense charts, seems as though there might be money in there to do for our residents what I think we should do, which is to either eliminate or reduce the cost of having a resident pass for the island. It could further help to pay for, if we were to continue that trolley system, help to pay for the trolley system that helps to eliminate the necessity for additional parking and the amount of vehicles on our roads, all of which will help to continue and preserve our island nature of being a residential community. So those are 4 things that I just didn't know if you had some additional questions on, but was interested to hear about.
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I agree with what Tamara just said. I thought that was a very good concept. But one thing I wanted to add too, that this should be discussed at the workshop, my personal opinion, is those local municipalities who are considered to be day trippers. You know, one time when I was a principal in Jasper, we had our challenge was a lot of the parents worked in the hotel industry on the island. They worked at the Sonesta, the Marriott, and they left about 5 a.m. on a bus to get here. Okay. My question would be, you know, they have invested in terms of working and supporting the island over the years. And one weekend they might want to come to Hilton Head with their family and spend time going to the beach. Okay. I think we need to look at that aspect also. And the reason why is because it shouldn't be a punishment to people who live in local municipalities to come to the beach, to come invest on Hilton Head, because they do come to the restaurants. They may not go to the 5-star restaurant. They might go to a diner. They might go to a food truck, what they can afford based on, you know, livable wages. So I think that needs to be a conversation, because it shouldn't be we're trying to discourage, but just like David said, you know, Caligny might be a higher end, but you know what? We got Fish Hall, we got Burks, we got Chaplin. Those might be some areas where it might be a little bit more affordable during certain times of the year. You know, especially too, because we also got some high school kids who come on the island and work during the summer, you know. And I just think we don't need to rush on that part. I just think that needs to be a conversation in terms of how we work with our municipalities and to address what we do. Because I agree with Tamara too in terms of the idea of maybe a shuttle, long-term shuttle, you know. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
I would like to put this on the council agenda for our next meeting to accept the report. Just to accept it, okay? And then I'd like David, with your public planning committee meeting, to discuss this topic and see if you can put together any kind of agenda or things you would like to talk about in our planning session. If we just put it on the planning session, we will spend 2 hours doing nothing and accomplishing nothing.
We'll
So
do
we
that.
have to go with it narrowed down to the topics we want to talk about, so we can give Jim some final answers back as to where we want to go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Yes. Okay, is there anything else for anybody else? Jim, thank you very, very much. We really
And
appreciate
we do have
Yes.
one member of the public.
Go ahead, Glenn.
A follow-up, Jim, to my question about timing. Could anything as a short-term solution, like implementing a system like this at Caligny, given the opening of Centennial Park, could we do some sort of just piecemeal solution down there for the coming season, short of doing the system for the entire community?
You could, and you know, that could be as basic as, you know, adding some additional manual labor to, you know, the old-fashioned pre-collect when somebody shows up to park for that day. You could take cash payments, you could have credit card readers. There is a very kind of, let's call it, rudimentary solution that you could implement that I don't think would require some very heavy lifting. And whether that's using existing town resources, town labor to do that, you know, we're not probably talking about, there's only so many entry exit points to that Caligny lot down there, so it could be easily managed. But if you're truly looking at to see how that experience is accepted and putting a program in place, moreover, really to kind of manage who's coming to patronize the park versus who's coming to patronize the beach. That was one of the things that we took a look at is we didn't want to get into the business of segregating those users. And so it was the approach of considering that all as one destination and one location. But I think that has to be further vetted through a policy decision.
I think that could be an interim solution to our problem, because next year with the park open, it's going to be much more chaotic than it was this year, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one citizen that is called in, is on the line.
Yes, it's Mr. Lee Lucier. Mr. Lucier?
Yes, good morning. This is Lee Lucier. I'm the CEO of the Richardson Group here on Hilton Head. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today about this pivotal issue and the insightful report. Let me begin by saying there's been much discussion, surveys, research, and meetings on this impactful issue. This study, as it appears to us, has been pre-engineered or has guided results, in my opinion. From the previous survey results, we know that a parking garage has little public support. We do realize that parking is an issue for approximately 80 days a year in the Cluny district. With this plan, a pay-to-park plan, we fear it will result in a path of least resistance for the Cluny area, businesses, and residents. Question is, what is the typical density of businesses, residences, and neighborhoods of other coastal areas that have been reported about? With a pay-to-park plan, many present businesses, several neighborhoods, and our local staffs will be impacted. Beach visitors will find an alternative to paying. With the present staffing and housing issue on the island, how does staff, with the majority of not islanders, they will have another reason to look elsewhere for employment because of the cost. The local businesses parking will be further overrun with beachgoers who will not or cannot afford these rates to park. All of this will be catastrophic, in our opinion, to local businesses, of which there are over 110 in this district. With the projections, revenue has not been flatlined in this area at this time. We have actual revenue numbers to show that revenue has not been flatlined. Day trippers do spend contrary to what's been said. For Jim, I have a question. What has been the previous economic trend or success of previous economic parking studies done by your firm? We see the economic revenue from this, but have these numbers come to fruition? As we talked about other barrier islands, parking, is it on private or public land? Is it within the neighborhoods or the parking district, commercial districts? Folly Beach was referenced specifically today, but Folly Beach's public parking area is not in a residential commercial district. It is at the end of the island with only access to that area through a parking submittal. Finally, New Jersey beach access has been referenced several times by John and Tamara, which I appreciate growing up in New Jersey. To compare it to Hilton Head is inaccurate because of the city block design of these towns and the access system for the beaches. On Hilton Head, the access is funneled to specific areas, unlike New Jersey, which has beach access upon every block. I appreciate your time. Jim, thank you very much for your firm's report. And town council and staff, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lucier.
If there's no more to be said, I'd like a motion to adjourn the meeting. Jim, thank you very, very much. Talk to you again soon. Yes, David?
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Thank you very much. Have a good day.